record chapter 2 because I disconnected in the middle. So we're going to go back, and this is chapter 2 called An Owl is Coming. Remember in chapter 1, Emrys awoke in his hut with Bronwyn, who he doesn't think is his mother, and he left the hut to go explore the village he lives in Wales. 5 years after he woke on the shore. Okay. Chapter 2, An Owl is Coming. The western sky had darkened as the moon had nearly set. Streaks of silver, shading into gray, lined the thick clouds above the village of Caer Fedwyl. In the dim light, its humped roofs of thatch looked like a group of shadowed boulders. Somewhere nearby I heard lambs crying, and my friends the geese began to wake up. A cuckoo in the bracken called twice. Under the dripping oak and ash trees, the fresh scent of bluebells mingled with the smell of wet thatch. It was May, and in May even a dreary village before dawn could seem lovely. I pulled a burr from the sleeve of my tunic, listening to the quiet stirrings. This month excited me like no other. Flowers opened their faces to the sky, lambs birthed, leaves sprouted, and as the flowers blossomed, so did my dreams. Sometimes in May, I swallowed my doubts and believed that one day I would find the truth, who I really was, where I really came from. If not from Bronwyn, then from someone else. In May, anything seemed possible. If only I could learn to harness time itself, to make every month like May, or perhaps to live backward in time, so that whenever the end of the month arrived, I could turn May right around again and live it all over. I chewed my lip. Whatever the month, this village would never be my favorite place, nor my home. I knew this early hour would be the finest of the day, before the sun's rays revealed its tattered huts and fearful faces. Like most villages in this rolling, thickly wooded country, Caer Fedwyl existed only because of an old Roman road. Ours ran along the north bank of the river Tyway, which flowed south all the way to the sea. Although the road had once carried streams of Roman soldiers, it now carried mainly vagabonds and wandering traders. It was a towpath for horses bringing barges of grain down the river, a route for those seeking the church of St. Peter in the city of Caer Myrddin to the south, and also, as I remembered well, a passage to the sea. A metal tool clanged in the smith's shop under the great oak. I could hear a horse tramping up the towpath, its bridle jingling. In another hour, people would be gathering in the square under the tree, where the village's 3 main paths converged. Soon the sounds of bartering, arguing, cajoling, and of course thieving would fill the air. 5 years in this place, and it still did not feel like home. Why? Perhaps because everything, from the local gods to the local names, was changing, fast, and the newly arrived Saxons had already started to call Wydfa, whose icy ridges towered over everything, Snow Hill or Snowdon. Likewise, people were now calling this region, long known as Gwynedd, the country of Wales. But to call it a country at all was to imply a kind of unity that did not really exist. Given the number of travelers and dialects that passed through just our little village every day, Wales seemed to me less a country than a way station. Following the path down to the mill house, I saw the last traces of the moonlight touching the slopes of Wydfa. The sounds of the waking village melted into the splashy clatter of the river flowing under the stone bridge by the mill. A frog bellowed, somewhere by the mill house, the only building in the village made of real brick. Without warning, a quiet voice from within me whispered, "An owl is coming." I whirled about just in time to see the square head and massive brown wings sail past me, as fast as the wind and as silent as death. 2 seconds later, it dropped into the grass behind the mill house, its talons squeezing the life out of its prey. "Stoat for supper," I grinned to myself, pleased that I had somehow known that the owl was approaching and that its invisible quarry was a stoat. How did I know? I had no idea. I simply knew, that's all. And I suppose that any reasonably observant person would have known as well. More and more, though, I wondered. I did sometimes seem to be a step ahead of other people in sensing what was about to happen. This talent, if you could call it a talent, had only just appeared in the last few weeks, so I didn't even begin to understand it, and I hadn't shared it with Bronwyn, or with anyone else. It could be nothing more than a string of lucky guesses. But if, in fact, it was something more, it might at least provide some entertainment, or even prove useful in a pinch. Only the day before, I had seen some village boys chasing one another with imaginary swords. For a brief moment, I longed to be one of them. Then the group's leader, Donatius, spied me and pounced on me before I could get away. I had never liked Donatius, who had spent the years since his mother's death as the smith's servant. He struck me as mean, stupid, and quick-tempered. But I had never tried to offend him, less out of kindness than the fact that he was much older and much larger than I, or any other boy in the village. More than once I had seen him struck by the smith's powerful hand for shirking his duties, and just as often I had seen Donatius do the same to someone smaller. Once he badly burned the arm of another boy who dared to question his Roman ancestry. All this ran through my mind the day before as I struggled to get away from him. Then I chanced to see a low-flying gull overhead. I pointed to the bird and cried, "Look! Treasure from the sky!" Donatius turned his face skyward at just the moment that the bird released an especially pungent sort of treasure, which splatted him right in the eye. While Donatius cursed and tried to wipe his face, the other boys laughed, and I escaped. Smiling, I thought of yesterday's close call. For the first time, I wondered whether I might possess a talent, a power, even more precious than predicting events. Suppose, just suppose, I could actually control events, make something happen, not with my hands, my feet, or my voice, with nothing but my thoughts. How exciting! It was probably just another May dream. But what if it was more? I could give it a try. As I approached the stone bridge over the river, I knelt beside a low, tightly cupped flower. Concentrating all my thoughts on the flower, I grew oblivious to everything else. The chilled air, the crying lambs, the smith's noises, all faded away. I studied the flower's lavender hue, touched on the east by the golden light of the emerging sun. Minuscule hairs, wearing droplets of dew, embroidered the edges of each petal, while a tiny brown aphid scurried across the collar of fringed leaves at the top of the stalk. Its aroma seemed fresh, but not sweet. Somehow I knew that its hidden center must be the color of aged yellow cheese. Ready at last, I began willing the flower to open. "Show yourself," I commanded. "Open your petals." I waited for a long moment. Nothing happened. Again, I focused on the flower. "Open. Open your petals." Still nothing happened. I started to stand. Then, very slowly, the collar of leaves began to flutter, as if touched by the barest of breezes. A moment later, one of the lavender petals stirred, unfurling an edge ever so slightly, before gradually beginning to open. Another petal followed, and another, until the whole flower greeted the oncoming dawn with petals outstretched, and from its center sprouted 6 soft sprigs, more like feathers than petals. Their color? Like aged yellow cheese. A brutal kick struck me in the back. Coarse laughter filled the air, crushing the moment as swiftly as a heavy foot crushed the flower. Okay, well, that was the end of Chapter 2 of The Lost Years of Merlin by T.A. Barron. We are going to resume tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Pacific time with Chapter 3, so join me then. Thanks.